All right, welcome into the Kodiak Broncos podcast. I am here to talk about a guy who has become a fan favorite in Broncos country and a guy whose role in the offense has really ramped up in recent weeks. I'm going to be talking about Marvin Mims and his career thus far. I imagine this to be a longer video, so grab your favorite beverage, kick back, and enjoy. Leave a like if you enjoy. Drop a comment. You can always wait until the end. Hopefully, I'll have earned it. Subscribe if you're not already. We're going to be talking about Broncos all season long, all off season on this channel, so let's dive right into it. So before we even talk about Marvin Mims, I think it's best if I jog your memory with some of the signature plays he's had thus far in his career. All right, so while you're watching these highlights in this play out of the backfield, sampling as how he's been used lately in these past few weeks, I just want to show some highlights from early on in his time with the Denver Broncos. And overall, it's been kind of a rocky stretch for Marvin Mims, which is why I wanted to make this video. I just wanted to hone in on, what kind of player he's been for the Broncos, his career thus far, what we can expect going forward, because he is a very, very unique player. I can't remember the last time the Broncos had a player that so many people thought was so talented but was underutilized, and it's not like the coaching staff is doing a bad job because they're clearly doing more with less, anyways, think back to last year with all these great plays from Marvin Mims. I'm just showing these to kind of jog your memory for a little bit before I start rambling about him, because the talent's there. The 4.38 speed definitely shows up when you watch him. The ability to make guys miss, especially on kick return. And a lot of times with how sad the Broncos have been, there have been a handful of times where a lot of people are saying, okay, Mims is the only thing we have, and Mims is one of the only things that should be worth keeping on this team. But anyways, as you see some of these deep balls from the game against Miami, like the Miami game in particular, since that was such a disaster, you had all these guys saying, oh, Marvin Mims might be the only thing that sticks around from our team besides Patrick Surtain. But either way, Marvin Mims, he just has a big play propensity. He's just a big play waiting to happen. And even though he hasn't really gotten consistent down-to-down reps at wide receiver, one thing that has really saved his game thus far has been punt returning and the ability to flip the field on any given week. And I think the Broncos are top 3 in special teams DVOA ever since they drafted Marvin Mims, which is great because it was only 2-3 years ago when we were having Dwayne Stukes and Tom McMillain and our special teams actively losing us games at every step of the way. But regardless, this guy is really, really talented. And yeah, I think it's worth taking a deep dive as to what kind of player he's been thus far, because it's kind of been a rocky arc, and I'm just interested to see I'm interested to do this deep dive, and let's do it together so we can talk about some Marvin Mims. Now that you watch those plays, here is what I'm talking about as it relates to Marvin Mims. I'm going to be talking about Marvin Mims' full football journey from high school to college to the NFL, how he was perceived as a prospect, and what we thought he would be when the Broncos drafted him in 2023 when they traded up to get him at the 62nd overall pick. And this is why I'm about to talk about why Broncos fans got so excited about him after his early success, and why Broncos fans got so fed up with his lack of usage on the offensive side of the ball, and his home in his new role, lining up in the backfield and, just being that versatile joker role almost, as Sean Payton calls it. But yeah, let's dive right into it. So Marvin Mims, he went to high school in Texas. He played high school football in Texas. No surprise, that's basically a breeding ground for NFL athletics. And usually, high school stats do not matter. Usually, high school stats are not sticky. They're not predictive in any way. But you can't talk about Marvin Mims' career without mentioning this. So, 5,485 receiving yards in his high school career. Number 8 ever for NFHS wide receivers. Also, NFHS, I think that's the acronym for that 24/7 Sports has for, like, the national football, like, high school history. That's basically what that is. So when I say NFHS, that's what that is. Admittedly, I didn't know that until I started making this video. But regardless, number 8 ever for high school wide receivers. That's absurd. That's absolutely insane. And then this is even more absurd. 2,626 receiving yards. That is the second most all-time in high school wide receiver history. 31 touchdowns his senior year, which is the 20th most in a single season. So all this led to him being a 4-star recruit, 155th ranked prospect, the 26th ranked wide receiver, and the 24th in the state of Texas. Now, I don't know how you have this kind of production and you're not at least considered a 5-star, but I digress. It was at least good enough to get him into Oklahoma, so he clearly did something right. He originally committed to Stanford, but he flipped to to Oklahoma, I believe, sometime in the middle of his senior year. But yeah, he was an early enrollee at Oklahoma as well. He started in January 2020. And here's kind of how his career went in Oklahoma. And so he basically gave the Sooners great production despite murky quarterback play. They were always rotating quarterbacks. And even though he played with some ones that were good, at least for college standards, like Rattler, and then he played with the #1 overall pick in last year's draft, Caleb Williams, and then it ended up being Dillon Gabriel. He never really had the chance to develop chemistry with any of his quarterbacks. And that's something that really a lot of people were noting on his draft profile, on his draft prospect profile, was he didn't really seem like the chemistry was ever there for Marvin Mims. But regardless, analytically, he crushes every production threshold. And a lot of this, okay, I think we can look at now and just be like, okay, yeah, he was a splash play threat. I mean, 20 yards per reception almost in college is absolutely absurd. And usually stuff like that doesn't translate well to the NFL. Usually speedsters don't translate that well to the NFL. It really doesn't do it for production in the modern era, especially because teams are better than ever. At least NFL teams are better than ever at defending the deep ball. They're better than ever at bracketing, at doubling, at, just deep passing is less effective than ever. But Marvin Mims, he has some of the best age-adjusted production ever at the college level, and he is the second player to have an 18-year-old 4+ yards per outrun college football season ever, next to Justin Ross, who could have been an animal if he never got all those spinal injuries. Analytically, he looks like a perfect dude because when he ran at the combine, he ran a 4.38, 9.13 RAS because he also jumped out the gym. I think the only thing hampering his RAS from being higher was the fact that he's a smaller wide receiver, but 99.9 PFF grade for single coverage. I have to imagine that's because he would just dust every college corner. 96th percentile breakout age, 96th percentile average depth of target. Great burst score, as I noted from that agility. The fact that he tested very well at the NFL Combine with his vertical jump, and 20.1 yards per reception. So he sounds great. He sounds like if you were just purely looking at analytics, he is legitimately probably a top 5 pick, top 10 pick, and on the level of guys like Odunze, guys like Jamar Chase, guys like Malik Neighbors. So what were the concerns people had about his game when they were talking about him as a prospect in spring of 2023? So this was kind of a weird time just to evaluate wide receiver play in general, more particularly in the Big 12, because the dudes that were really good, we knew it. We knew it, like, if you look at guys like MHJ, if you look at guys like Neighbors, we knew that those guys were dudes, even with all the, shape-shifting that's gone on with college football and with COVID in general and how that's impacted the sport. But it is really, really difficult to evaluate college football wide receivers against COVID Big 12 defenses. Because you remember, 2020, his freshman year, you were playing against defenses that were down to their 5th or 6th string corners. So offenses in football just exploded in 2020. Most points ever scored in the NFL were in 2020. And then in college football, he also ran a very, very limited route tree. So he pretty much only exclusively ran go routes, slant routes, and caught screen passes, which it didn't really give him a chance to develop his full-fledged route tree. So I wish that was a part of his game, but ultimately, when you are playing at Oklahoma, that doesn't really need to be a part of your game. So but the gimmicky offenses and the quarterback inconsistency didn't really allow him to develop his wide receiver skills. Now, he was playing with some good college quarterbacks, but at the same time, he didn't have a lot of consistency at that position, and even the guys like Rattler and Caleb Williams didn't end up peaking until they were off Oklahoma anyway. And NFL teams, they've kind of soured on the burner-type wide receivers. Heck, if you were just looking at raw box score stats, Jalen Hyatt, I guarantee you, he probably goes top 15 in the same draft class that Marvin Mims went. And honestly, if only these dudes had been in the NFL like 10 to 15 years prior, they'd be absolutely flying downfield on go routes. But ultimately, the NFL is better than ever at defending speed. So why was everybody so excited about him getting drafted by the Broncos? This is time for us to talk about his Broncos career thus far. So props to me if you've stayed here that long. So the Broncos, they had very, very little draft capital after the Russell Wilson deal, and they still traded up for Marvin Mims. Now, we were littered with holes on our roster after the Russell Wilson deal because it absolutely hampered us. Like, we had made terrible signings like Randy Gregory and just a bunch of other things that we had done that were completely nonsensical. But the roster was absolutely in shambles. But Sean Payton, he decided that he was going to be lukewarm on this wide receiver room, and it was comprised of Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, and Tim Patrick. Now, what I will say is that at the end of 2022, it looked like the Broncos dude going forward was going to be Jerry Jeudy because he ended the year of 2022 white hot, whereas Sutton was kind of a non-factor. But adding into this, Sean Payton, he always had great speedster usage. Like, you had guys like Devery Henderson, Ted Ginn, Brandon Cooks, even Willie Snead there as well. So he had a knack for knowing how to use this kind of profile, these guys that, fit the kind of profile that Marvin Mims had and what he was drafted as. Now, the only part of Russell Wilson's game after the 2022 year that people were confident was still there was the deep ball. And he still took a bunch of sacks. He still ran into a bunch of, trouble on himself. He still has probably one of the worst pressure to sack ratios ever as a quarterback. But at the end of 2022, one thing was apparent, that he could still sling it downfield. He could still sling it 20 yards downfield. Probably couldn't see over his offensive lineman. Don't know if he can still see over his offensive lineman. But it was very evident the past 2 years that Russell Wilson was a Denver Bronco, was that the deep ball had never, ever faded. The deep ball had never gone away, as evidenced by what Courtland Sutton was able to do for us. But when you draft a college wide receiver who is accumulating 20 yards per reception, that is a lot. That is a lot, and it looks like it is going to be wheels up for that particular wide receiver. Now, he was also the first draft pick of the Sean Payton era, and one thing that I think should be noted is that Jerry Jeudy asked Sean Payton for a trade before the 2023 season began. Sean Payton said, absolutely not. We used our fifth-year option on you. We actually really like you. We think that you have a bright future with this football team. And then in August in 2023, Tim Patrick tears his Achilles, which is just brutal because he had the ACL tear in July 2022. And then a year later in August 2023, he goes down, and a lot of people are saying, all right, this is Marvin Mims' time to shine. And so he did. He did, at least very early on. Now, he got 242 receiving yards and some really long plays. Everybody in the Broncos in Broncos country remembers how they felt watching that deep ball against the Commanders. And he also had another really long catch, I think, in the same quarter of that game. And he had a really long kick return against Miami and another really, really nice contested catch. And a lot of people were saying after that Miami game that he was the only thing worth hanging on to. Same with Patrick Surtain. Look at that Broncos Reddit, post-game thread. Everybody's like, all right, fire everybody. Keep Sean Payton. Keep Marvin Mims. Keep Patrick Surtain. Let everybody else walk out the door. And honestly, that's the trajectory that I thought this franchise was headed on before they, turn it around mid-season, almost improbably. But yeah. So he also had that play against the Bears to set up into field goal range when we came back from that 28-7 deficit. And he became an immediate, one thing I have not mentioned, he became an immediate special teams standout, as evidenced by the fact that whenever he returned the ball, I felt like the field was going to flip. I felt like, okay, even if he didn't score a touchdown, I always felt like he could go for at least 10 to 15, 20 yards. And that's removing an extra play that your offense has to be on the field for. He did it a lot last year against Buffalo, against Kansas City, in those pivotal games we won with that 5-game winning streak. So he got relegated to special teams duties only, and this is why. So the Broncos, they figured that he did not have a very, very good route tree, and he could not run good routes. The Broncos only had, I believe, I can't remember how many routes he actually ran last year outside of week 4, but I remember it was not a lot, and 46% of those routes were go routes, meaning he was just running straight down the field. And this is due to his dreadful route winning numbers. So 42% success rate versus man, 69% versus zone, 0% versus double. And for context, I just put Jonathan Mingo's reception perception numbers up top as well. Jonathan Mingo is 59% success versus man and 73 versus zone. So the fact that Marvin Mims was as bad as was way worse than Jonathan Mingo at beating man coverage, that is not good. That is not good at all. That just shows you what kind of receiver that Marvin Mims was in 2023. He was just relegated to special teams duties only. So a lot of people were harping on the coaching staff for not getting him the ball more. And the more that's gone on. I feel like as a real wide receiver, I feel like the coaching staff has been proven right time and time again. Now, one thing that really hurts the coaching staff's case is I feel like since Marvin Mims played so well so early on when you gave him all those deep balls, that people are going to be clamoring for it all year long. And people clamored for it until the end of the year, and people still clamored for it, until 2 weeks ago when we finally got him involved. But here's why everybody was frustrated with the role. So every week, it seemed like every week we had a reporter ask Sean Payton, why aren't you getting him the football more? And there'd be a bunch of things like, oh, we just, want to do whatever. There's a bunch of dudes we want to get the ball more into. I don't know. There's a million quotes that you can find on Twitter about Sean Payton talking about Marvin Mims and what he wanted to do and what he wanted to, do and as far as getting him the ball so that the ball could get into Marvin Mims' hands and he could just do what he does best, which is go downfield, break a bunch of tackles, and yeah. But regardless, Sean Payton was perfectly content with him being an all-pro kick returner, punt returner with a bad route tree. And honestly, for a second-round pick, is that disappointing? Yes, the impact on the offensive side of the ball is disappointing, but you have to remember that this team emphasized special teams, and it looks like it's kind of paid off because there are a lot of games where the special teams battle has made the difference, and quite frankly, I don't know if we win the game without a guy like Marvin Mims, but he has the most big play potential on the team, so I get everybody's frustration. I get why everybody wanted him to work out so badly as a wide receiver, especially because the limited work he got in a terrible wide receiver room. I mean, Lil'Jordan Humphrey, like you're telling me that we couldn't give Marvin Mims a screen pass instead of Lil'Jordan Humphrey so that Lil'Jordan Humphrey can fumble the ball regardless. I think that's no disrespect to Lil'Jordan Humphrey. He's kind of gotten better, but Lil'Jordan Humphrey and Brandon Johnson both outsnapped Marvin Mims significantly last year. So another frustration with Marvin Mims is that it just hurts when you look at the fact that we drafted him over Tank Dell, Josh Downs, and Puka Nacua. I think Cedric Tillman's in that bucket as well. And it's not necessarily that any of those guys are definitively more valuable to their teams than Marvin Mims is to the Broncos. I mean, as far as real wide receivers, sure. But again, Marvin Mims has had a huge impact on this team just from the special team standpoint. So yes, you can be frustrated that he's not putting up the numbers of a Tank Dell, of a Josh Downs, of a Puka Nacua, and that's completely fine, and that's valid because I wish that the Broncos were able to utilize their late second-round wide receiver better than they have been. But either way, I feel like that's also part of the frustration is you look at those guys just absolutely smash in their roles, or at least did smash last year in Tank Dell and Puka Nacua's case, and yeah. But apparently beat writers saw him yelling at coaches in training camp, and I need someone to verify. I need someone to let me know if there's validity to that because I haven't been able to verify it. I wasn't at training camp. I haven't heard anything about that. I saw like one thing on Twitter about that, and I just want to hear Broncos Country's thoughts and what they heard, if there's any actual rumblings or truth to that. And yeah. So how did Marvin Mims end up getting this role? How did he end up getting this backfield alignment role? Well, his return ability has bought him a little bit of a leash. When you have a guy who has historically bad success rate numbers as a wide receiver, the fact that he was an all-pro kick returner, that's going to give him a lot of leeway. That's going to give him a lot of leeway to not only stay on the roster, first of all, but for him to eventually get a shot. And it looks like he got a shot. I don't know what made the coaching staff kind of do a 180 these past few weeks. I don't know what made them, take this long to think about this if he's a very fast guy who can't run routes. But regardless, I'm really enjoying this because this is very similar utilization to how Deebo Samuel gets used in San Francisco. And since the running back room has been so up and down this year, Javonte looks absolutely washed 2 weeks, and then he is the leading rusher on the team 1 week, and then rinse and repeat. Jaleel McLaughlin, like 4 to 5 touches a game he gets. And, one of them he could spring, but for the most part, he's a very, limited chunk play sort of dude. And then Audric Estime, jury's kind of still out on him because he led the team in touches against the Chiefs, and then he gets, 7 touches against the Falcons this past Sunday. which, don't get me wrong, that was quite a bit, especially because we were spreading the ball around a lot. But I thought Estime was going to have a grip on this backfield going forward. But yeah. But my point is, this is really nice to have an extra weapon in the backfield and it's a win-win-win for everybody because Marvin Mims, he gets real usage. Denver has a very nice versatile weapon, and Sean Payton finds a role for him. Now, the versatility of a player like this is huge for our offensive efficiency because it is going to keep the defense so honest. It is going to keep the defense guessing. It's going to keep them guessing as far as if you're running, if you're passing. And I know that you could say that about literally any player who is kind of versatile that you line up in the backfield. But the ability to have a guy who can, be that fast out of the backfield for you, and the fact that you can give him a couple HB tosses a game and just let the Broncos blockers go out and do their thing, that's absolutely great. And I feel like Sean Payton, he's going to have those guys playing cohesive. Zach Strief, he's going to have them doing a great job as well. And they have done a great job. They have done a great job at utilizing him so far. I think one of the biggest reasons why we were able to take our fight to Kansas City so well is because we had a couple drive-extending plays from Marvin Mims in the backfield role. Now, what's next for Marvin Mims? So it's to be determined because we have to see how the rest of the season goes. We've seen a bunch of guys, look like they've gotten a role and then get completely phased out of the offense. But I think the Broncos, they have to rethink their skill position philosophy in general because, Kerry Colbert's just not working out, a wide receiver coach. The running back coach, he's not working out either. Something from the top down needs to change because none of the guys that we've taken, none of the skill position dudes that we've taken ever since 2019 have been worth the investment whatsoever. That being said, I feel like Marvin Mims, as crazy as it sounds, he is the first to be worth it. Yeah, sure, we might not be reaping the ultimate rewards as a wide receiver, but for an NFL team, for our offense, he could mean as much as anyone, especially if we keep using him like this. I'm expecting him to be a great returner, even if this kind of flails out, even if this, ends up being an absolute nothing burger. And I expect the Broncos to add at every skill position in this upcoming offseason. I imagine they're going to add a more explosive running back. I imagine they're going to add a wide receiver and see what Bo Nix can do with a bona fide wide receiver one. And, add a couple of tight end bodies as well because Lord knows we need him. And overall, I'm really happy for Marvin Mims because he gives us something that nobody else on this team has. So yeah, that does it for me. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.